Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture what we will do is that we will start creating the login activity. So without wasting any time, let's directly go to the app, right click over here and create a new activity. That's going to be an empty activity, and let's name it as login activity. Then click finish and our activity is going to be created for us. So in this activity we are going to have just two edit fields or edit text and a button. So one edit text is going to be for entering the email and the next one is going to be to enter the password. And the button, when clicked, is going to basically check the logic, or it's actually going to sign in the user if the credentials are okay. So what we will do here is that we will first switch to the XML code. We will make this thing a linear layout, and I always go with linear layout because I think it's the simplest one, and you don't need to actually use some another layout unless and until you have to make your application look really fancy. So we are also going to learn how to make the app look fancy as well, but for now we are going to focus mainly upon the logical part. Okay, so once this thing is done, let's also set the orientation of this to vertical. And now let's add in edit text over here quickly. So that's going to be edit text, match parent, wrap content. The ID is going to be, let's say, login email, as this one is for email, and the hint is going to be let's say enter email, and the same thing is going to be for password as well. So I'm going to simply copy this code, paste it over here. That's going to be login pass, and this is going to say enter password. And finally let's have a button here, and the width is going to be match parent, wrap content. Let's say the on-click method associated with this button is, let's say, login button clicked. So once we have set up everything, finally let's give it some name, like let's say login, and we are good to go. So once this thing is done, let's move on to the Java code and actually program this layout. So here we have it, the login activity, and in the login activity, the first thing which you need to do is that you do need to get a reference to both the edit text. So let's quickly do that by typing private edit text. That's going to be login email, and private edit text, that is going to be login pass. And finally we do need to have a reference to the Firebase auth as well as the database reference. So here let's first have a reference to Firebase auth. So that's going to be Firebase auth. Let's name this thing as mauth, and then after this let's also have a reference to the database as well. So database reference, let's say m database. And once we are done with this, the next thing which we do is that we actually set up the values over here in the onCreate method. So that's going to be login email equals edit text find view by id r.id dot, that is going to be what, I guess, login email, and the login pass is going to be equal to, let's say, edit text find view by id r.id dot login pass. So once this thing is done, we are basically good to go. So the next thing which you need to do is that you need to set the method which is login button click. So we type in public void login button clicked. This is going to have a view. Make sure that you import the view as well, and now inside here we get the values entered by the user in both of these edit text fields. So for that we will type in string email equals, that is going to be login email dot get text dot to string, and also trim this thing up. And finally string, that's going to be password equals, that's going to be login pass dot, that should be get text dot to string dot trim. And once this thing is done, what we could do is that we could directly pass these two methods to the sign in with email and password method. But even before doing that, we do need to check if these two values are actually non-empty. So for that, we use if not textutils dot is empty and check for the emptiness of email. Use and not textutils dot is empty and check for the emptiness of the password field as well. And after this, what you need to do is that you simply need to use the mauth and use the method which is sign in with email and password. So it's actually quite easy for signing in the user. You just have to pass in the email and the password over here, and Firebase is actually going to do everything for you. And if you add the onCompleteListener method, what it's going to do is that it's actually going to give you a method which is onComplete, and in this method you could write in the code which you want to execute once the user is successfully logged in. So in this case, what we want to do, we want to make sure that the task is successful. So we type if task dot is successful. So that means if this thing happens, then what we want to do is that we want to make sure that the user actually exists. So in order to do that, what we will do is that we will go ahead and create a new method here, and that is going to be a method called as check user exists. And this method is actually going to go ahead and check for us if the user actually exists. So right now we have not created this method yet. So what we will do is that we will go ahead and create this method right away. So in order to create this method, we will go right here, type in public void check user exist, and this method is actually going to first get the user ID. So we'll type in final string, that's going to be user underscore ID, and we get the ID from mauth. So mauth dot get current user. So we get the current user and get its unique ID by using the get UID method. So what we do now is that we use the reference to the database. So that's going to be mdatabase dot add value event listener, and that's going to be new value event listener. And here what we are going to do is that we are going to go ahead, and whenever the data related to the user changes, what we want to essentially do is that we want to start a new activity. That is, now what you want to do is that once everything is successfully completed, you want to redirect the user to the new activity, which is nothing but the main activity once the user is successfully logged in. So in here, what we do is that we first check if the user actually has the ID. So we type if data snapshot dot has child, and if it has a child which is user ID, so that means we do have a user, we could redirect him to the new activity via intent. So let's create an intent here. So intent, let's say login intent, and make sure to import intent equals new intent. That's going to be login activity dot this comma main activity dot class. So once this thing is done, you could finally start the intent, which is the login intent. So let me just quickly go ahead, type in login intent over here, and once this thing is done, we are pretty much good to go. So what we have done here is that we have set up the layout for our login screen. So this is our login activity right here, and this is its layout. So we have two edit text, email and password, and a button. So what we are essentially doing here is that we extract the values over here by first getting a reference to both of the edit text, and in the button click method, which is the login button click method, first we get the actual values, we trim those values, store them into these two variables. Then we actually check for the emptiness of these two things. That is, if these two things are not empty, only then we want to proceed ahead. So in order to do that, we use textutils.isEmpty, and now once we confirm that these values are not empty, then we use the mauth and the method, which is nothing but sign in with email and password. And in here we pass in the email and password values, and in order to check if this task is successfully completed, we add in an onCompleteListener to it, and in the onComplete method we first check if the task is successful. So if the task is successful, we check if the user actually exists. So in order to do that, what we do is that we first check if the user already exists. So if that thing happens, then what we want to do is that whenever any change related to that user occurs, we first check if the data snapshot, that is this value, actually has child with the user ID, which is going to be this user ID right here. So if that thing happens, then what we want to do is that we want to redirect the user to the main activity. So we have created an intent for that over here. And once that thing is done, we are basically good to go. So that's it for this lecture, and in the next lecture what we are going to do is that we are going to go ahead and test this application and see how it works. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.